Dave with Taboo Customs. This video today, we've got something a little bit different for you. Behind me here, we've got a 95 Jeep Grand Cherokee belonging to my stepson. What has happened with this Jeep is that he was driving along and got on his brakes, apparently too hard, and did something that's a little bit odd and grenaded a brake rotor. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, pull the tire off, see all the damage that's occurred. He actually did keep driving this after the brake rotor grenaded, so might be interesting what happened to the rest of the brake rotor as he was driving along. But we will need to see what all damage has occurred, figure out what we need to do to fix it, and then get it repaired. So let's take a look. Before I go to pull the wheel off, I'm going to want to check a few things. One, I can look through there and I can see that there's no rotor left, at least the outside portion of the rotor that runs through the caliper. However, it appears that the center section is still behind the wheel, which is good because had that started to break apart and come out, obviously the wheel would have been loose at that point and probably would not, definitely not been safe. The other thing I'm going to want to check is the any play in this wheel hub or in the ball joints, because being it was a catastrophic failure, there's a good chance it put some forces on those other areas that might have also caused them to fail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically grab the top and bottom of the tire and try to move it back and forth, see how much play it has, which actually it's really tight, so no issues there as of now. So let's go ahead and pull the tire off. Okay. Well, here's the inside of the rotor, and actually, I mean, you can tell this thing was amazingly thin where it broke. I mean, this down here is pretty much rusted to almost to a point where it broke off. Like it'd been rusting and wearing for quite a while, and you can see, even on this chunk here, how much rust is on the inside of it. I mean, it still had enough meat to it, but it was just old. So interesting enough, whenever he slammed on the brakes, there's a chunk of the rotor actually stuck inside this caliper. And more than likely, I'm pretty sure these guide pins here are pretty bent. But here, let me grab the camera. So you can see, I told him after he drove it back, I was worried because I'm like, this brake pad starts to kick out, and these brake pads had a lot of meat on them. These brake pads get kicked out here, and if this cylinder and this caliper comes out, pretty much he's not going to have any brakes. But apparently with this stuck in here, it basically gave something for the brake to push on, so probably continued to work. But you can see that definitely wallered out, so we'll have to pull that off and take a look at outlook. All right, so take caliper off in case you're wondering, and this may be different for different Jeeps. The banjo bolt on the back for the line, and this one is 14 millimeter. And the caliper bolt's actually holding the caliper, and I probably should have grabbed something to collect that fluid, but and they are certainly bent. I can see that as I'm taking them off. Oh yeah, probably hard to see in the camera. But basically, right in here, bent quite a ways. Okay. Oh, that one's bent enough that it doesn't want to come out of the sleeve that it actually slides in and out of. there. Here you can see, that piece of caliper stuck in there. So being that, calipers are so cheap, I'm going to go ahead and replace his caliper. We'll replace his guide pins. In general, gosh, it's hard telling if this the bracket here is bent. More than likely, being a cast item, is going to bend and break, which would be a bigger concern. But it doesn't look bent. What we'll probably do is we'll get the new caliper and see how lined up it looks to be with the new caliper on here. Essentially, caliper is really held by those two tabs. These pieces here probably did take out the rest of the rotors that came around, but as thin as the rotor looks, chances are it may not have done a whole lot of damage. You can see here in this piece of rotor, right here, like I talked about how thin that rotor actually had rusted down to. It was really just not even what looks like a 1/16 of material that was holding that rotor on. So let's go get the new caliper and we'll get it reinstalled. Okay, so we're back. We did end up getting new brake pads, new caliper. We've obviously got a new rotor. Massive difference in the rotors. Now this was obviously the rotor that came off of it, and this is just a stamped sheet metal center section for this rotor versus this rotor here, which is a cast rotor, and this section down in here is a good 3/16 thick. So this rotor here that was sheet metal and stamped, assume then that the outside of the rotor, the part that actually goes through the caliper, has to be welded on. You see that area that it was welded probably was where it really rusted and where it eventually failed. Now as for the pads, the pads pretty new. Unfortunately though, looking at them closer, you can see right there that whenever the rotor failed, it actually cracked the pads, and this crack actually does go down all the way through the pad. You can't hardly see it on the camera, but it does run right through there. So ended up trashing the pads. So new rotor, new pads, new caliper, pretty much all new brakes on this side. We are going to end up checking the other side. We'll probably end up at minimum replacing the pads over there, so we have even pads. We're probably going to recommend to the stepson go ahead and replace that rotor at the same time. That way, clean rotor, clean pads. Chances are our rotor over there is not in great shape. Usually they aren't. So get to putting it back together. Now the new caliper did come with a new banjo bolt. Came with new copper washers, which they usually do. And lucky enough, came with new bolts for the rotor to the axle, so that'll work out pretty well. All right, so all we've got left is to check our brake rotor on the other side and to put the wheel and tire back on this side and bleed these brakes. So, make sure that you're, when you're doing your maintenance on your vehicle, you're checking your brake parts, checking for these old, cheap stamped rotors that, could potentially fail on you. And, he's pretty lucky this time, but, anytime your brakes fail, it could certainly be catastrophic. So, thanks for watching, and if you have any questions or comments, you can leave them here on YouTube, or you can get a hold of us on our website, taboocustoms.com, or on Facebook and Instagram. Anyway, thanks for watching, and as always, a like or subscribe.